Hello, everyone. My name is Ke, and I was a master's student in the Department of Civil and Mineral Engineering at the University of Toronto. And today it's my honor to be here to talk about my master's research with Chris from Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So the title of my presentation today is Meadow Restoration Along a Hydro Corridor in Toronto, Enhanced Hydrological Regulating Services. So in this presentation, Chris will firstly briefly introduce this fascinating project, provide some background, and introduce the study sites. And then I will specify the objectives of this study and talk about the main part of this research, a systematic review, the soil physical hydraulic property analysis, and rainfall simulation tests. And at last, I will briefly discuss results, make some conclusions, and provide recommendations for future research. So I will hand over to Chris to introducing this fascinating project.
Thanks, Ke. Hi, everyone. So I'm a project manager with the Toronto Conservation Authority. Ke and I met several years ago while I was working on the Meadow project. And this is a project where we're converting the hydro corridor running through Scarborough into a naturalized meadow. And it really is an untapped potential in terms of ecological recovery because there are so many of these right-of-ways and corridors throughout, every city. For example, just in Toronto alone, there's about 500 kilometers of these corridors that could be renaturalized. And by doing the renaturalization, it saves a lot of effort in terms of land managers by reducing the amount of mowing they have to do, gets rid of just the plain low diversity grass that lacks any aesthetics, and provides additional habitat. You can go to the next slide, Ke. So just to give you a context of the scale of this project, this is sort of an overall map of the Toronto Region Conservation Authority's jurisdiction over Toronto, and you can see the red line with the Meadow there, and it's a 16-kilometer long stretch that we are working to create natural meadows with a trail system that will connect as an east-west corridor within the city of Toronto. And in terms of the benefits that this is going to create, it does create more habitat. It creates pollinator food sources. We are contributing to all these habitat linkages between all the north-south running river systems, as well as many, many other ecosystem services. So as part of the restoration team that I've been working with, we're looking at transforming all this to create all of this additional space for natural habitat. And along with that, it's improving the water infiltration and soil erosion and reducing potential flooding and increasing the amount of knowledge that we can learn by having additional research. And that's where Ke and I met working together to put together these projects. So her project is looking at how this meadow is helping with water infiltration within the city of Toronto. And I'll pass it back over to you.
Hey, thank you, Chris. So just like Chris has mentioned, the urban green space like the Meadow can provide many ecosystem services. So ecosystem services is a term used to categorize the benefits provided by ecosystems to humans. There are four main categories: social and cultural services, regulating services, supporting services, and provision services. So in this presentation, I will primarily focus on the hydrological regulating services provided by the Meadow, such as surface runoff retention. So the objectives of my study were two. Firstly, systematic review and understand the hydrological regulating services provided by urban green space and identify some applicable key performance indicators and monitoring approaches to assess them for the Meadow. And secondly, to evaluate if the Meadow restoration in the Meadow enhanced the hydrological regulating services of the land. And finally, provide some recommendations for future research on the evaluation of the Meadow. So in the next few slides, I will talk about the systematic review. This is the whole process of the systematic review. So a list of keywords were used for searching in two databases, Engineering Village and Web of Science. So this returned about 4,000 papers. And then consistent inclusion and exclusion criteria were applied for screening. And there are two rounds of screening. The first round is based on title and abstract, and the second round is based on full text. So eventually, 57 journal articles were selected for full text review. And here are the results. So it was found that urban green space can provide a large variety of ecosystem services with different key performance indicators used in different studies. So here we can see that it can provide or enhanced hydrological regulation services, and common key performance indicators used to assess it include runoff volume and rate, time of concentration, recharge volume, the rate of infiltration and percolation, as well as water quality. So for the Meadoway, so for hydrological regulation services, it was found that the urban green space can facilitate surface runoff reduction and retention. And vegetation composition and structure, as well as the soil characteristics, can affect the runoff retention and reduction capacity of the land. So for the Meadoway, where the original turf grasses were replaced by native plants, the different root traits of these two different plant species can possibly alter the hydraulic properties of the soil. And the tillage practice during restoration might also contribute to that. And the different evapotranspiration patterns of native plants and turf grasses might have also altered the ecohydrology of the land. So it was hypothesized that the meadows and turf lands will have very different hydrologic response and behaviors. So two KPIs were identified for the Meadoway: the infiltration capacity in meadows and turf lands, and a more general one, hydrologic response of meadows and turf lands to storm events. So these two can be assessed by on-site infiltration tests and soil physical and hydraulic parameters analysis and rainfall simulation tests. So in the next part, I will talk about the soil physical and hydraulic property analysis of the soil from the land. So this is the location of the Meadoway, and there are 6 study sites in total in the Section 4, Section 5 East, Section 5 West, and Section 7 of the Meadoway. So the Meadoway is actually located in 2 physiographic regions, the South Slope and the Iroquois Sand Plains. So these 2 regions have very distinct soil types. And by the time of this research, Section 4 and 7 have been restored with native meadows, while Section 5 West and East have not. So soil samples were taken from both the restored meadows and unrestored turf buffer areas or turf lands from Section 4 and 7, and only be taken from the unrestored turf lands from Section 5 West and East. So there are in total 6 study sites. And 3 parameters were analyzed. The infiltration, in situ infiltration capacity was measured by double ring infiltration tests. And the cone index of surface soil was measured by penetrometer tests. And the bulk density and porosity of subsurface soil were analyzed from intact soil samples. So for each study site, 1 hectare representative land was selected for field testing and soil sampling. And 9 test or sampling locations were selected for each study site. So this is an example for sampling locations in Section 4. And undisturbed lands such as informal trails were avoided from infiltration tests and soil sampling. And for each infiltration test, 5 cone index measurements were taken evenly around each test location to help select locations with representative soil compaction conditions for the study site. And these are the equipment we used to collect samples and do field tests. And here are the results. So it was found that the restored meadows and pre-restored turflands have very similar infiltration capacities, while the aerial sampling has a significantly greater infiltration capacity than the sampling, so very likely to be caused by the different soil types in these two regions. And the meadow restoration significantly reduced the cone index at soil surface, indicating that the restored meadows have much less compacted surface soil. However, the meadow restoration significantly increased the bulk density and decreased the porosity of subsurface soil at around 30 centimeters, indicating that the meadows might have more compacted subsurface soil. The last part of this study is rainfall simulation tests. So rainfall simulation tests were conducted upon undisturbed vegetated soil samples, followed by water balance analysis. And each test was accompanied by saturated hydraulic conductivity measurements. So 5 pairs of samples were taken from Section 4 restored meadows and unrestored buffer area, with 2 extra samples taken from a cultural meadow in Rouge National Park, which is older than the restored meadows. This is the equipment we use to simulate the rainfall. So undisturbed soil samples were taken using this soil cutter, and a peristaltic pump was used to control the flow rate and simulate rainfall events through this rainfall simulation container. And these 2 containers were used to collect the surface runoff and exfiltration generated through each vent. And all rainfall events were designed based on the IDF curves in the region with a return period from 2 to 100 years. And each event lasted for 10 minutes, which is the minimum duration of design rainfall based on TRCA's document. And after each event, the volume of water in the 2 containers was measured to help calculate the surface runoff, exfiltration, and water retained by the soil during the event. And also the ratios to total precipitation were calculated for each component. And here are the results of rainfall simulation tests. So the top 3 graphs show the results of the samples taken from the restored meadows and buffer area. And the bottom one showed the results from the cultural meadow. So the green represents surface runoff, the yellow represents exfiltration, and the blue represents the water retained by the soil. So we can see that as the rainfall intensity increases, we have much greater surface runoff. However, even with very, very intense rainfall events with a return period of 100 years, the samples taken from restored meadows tend to have much less surface runoff than the samples taken from the unrestored buffer area. So it was concluded that the meadow restoration can significantly decrease surface runoff volume, while the meadow and buffer area had very close saturated hydraulic conductivities. So this indicated that the infiltration test solely might not be able to characterize the hydraulic performance of the land. So in the last few slides, I will discuss results and provide some recommendations for future research. So here are the 3 effects of meadow restoration discovered by this study. The decreased cone index of surface soil, decreased surface runoff, and increased bulk density of subsurface soil. And there are 2 factors that might contribute to these effects: the tillage practice and the restoration of native plants. So firstly, the tillage practice can loosen surface soil, and the native plants have thicker and longer roots than the turf grasses, which might have altered the soil structure. So both 2 factors might have contributed to the decreased cone index of surface soil and the decreased surface runoff. However, similarly to the findings from many previous studies, tillage practice can possibly compact subsurface soil, which might be the reason for the observed increased bulk density of subsurface soil. So based on the results, at least 3 ecosystem services are expected from meadow restoration. So the first one is the flood control. So the restored meadows have a great potential to reduce the amount of surface runoff, even during very intense rainfall events, with a return period of 100 years compared with pre-restored turflands. And the second one is erosion control. So the reduced surface runoff can decrease water-related soil erosion and sediment transport. And the last one is nutrient cycling. So the reduced water-related soil erosion can also mitigate the nutrient losses, especially for organic carbon and phosphorus. So for future research, it is recommended that paired restored meadow and adjacent turflands to be selected as study site to reduce the possible effects of variabilities in soil properties to our results. And long-term monitoring should be conducted in the future as meadows tend to mature and might have more significant effects on the land. And surface soil analysis of structural and textural parameters, such as particle size distribution and pore size distribution, and root trait analysis.
Sorry, buddy. Kind of on a call.
Sorry?
Sorry, I've just muted one of the microphones that I think accidentally came open.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll continue. And root trait analysis, such as root density, root length density, and root radius. So these comprehensive analysis should be conducted in the future to find out the root causes of meadow restoration on the performance, the hydrological performance of the land. And finally, rainfall simulation tests should be conducted in the future, but probably at a larger scale and more realistic designed storms, and probably integrated with water quality analysis as well. These are the references of this study, and this is the end of presentation. Do you have any questions? Thank you so much for your attention and listening.